All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nagui Rouphail, along with Behzad Aghdashi at North Carolina State University. We are pleased to host this webinar, whose title is Freeway Facility Reliability, Improved Modeling of Incident Impacts. Basically, just to mention that NC State is part of a consortium of 10 universities within the STRIDE Center, which is the Region 4 Southeast University Transportation Center, with University of Florida as the lead institution. The mission of the center is to develop novel strategy for reducing congestion, and that also jives well with our project that deals with incident and their impact on congestion. You can use keyboard there. So now let me tell you a little bit about the webinar today. We have basically 4 major topics. The first one is a little introduction of the topic and us. We'll talk a little bit about the freeway facility method, because that's really the context in which this project has taken place. I will then hand the presentation to Dr. Aghdashi, who will talk about the new modeling approach that was developed in the course of this research, as well as a very short demonstration of the computational engine, which is the FREEVAL NC. And hopefully we will leave some time toward the end for any question and answers. So, tell you a little bit about who we are. I'm a professor here at NC State. Believe it or not, the freeway facilities method was developed over 20 years ago. We just celebrated our 20th birthday. It was the first method really that documented the facility and incorporated congestion, queuing, and spillback. And initially it was implemented in Excel, but as the method became quite complex, it's been expanded as part of NCHRP 3115 and was incorporated in the 2015 HCM, which is HCM 6, that also included the effect of reliability, weather, incident, and work zone. Dr. Aghdashi here is the manager of the data lab at ITRI, the Driver Transportation Analytics Lab. Behzad has also developed and contributed to major enhancement to both the HCM methodology and more specifically to the computational engine, which he will demonstrate toward the end. And he's been working on this for about a decade. So let's start with the context. Basically, as I mentioned, the method was developed in the late 90s. And if you want to know more about the computational engine, because not only there's been enhancement, but several incarnations of FREEVAL, and we have pointed here to a website where you can visit and download any one of those versions of FREEVAL, depending on your interests. And then back in 2015, the method was including essentially travel time reliability, starting with the SHARP2 project on SHARP2 LO8, which dealt with reliability in the HCM. And typically the methods can evaluate the effect of any geometric improvement, any safety treatment, active traffic and demand management, and how any of these impact freeway mobility. So let me talk a little bit about the 6th edition and where our project comes from. Those of you who may or may not be familiar with HCM 6, there are really 3 primary chapters. In Volume 2, Chapter 10 and 11 on facilities and reliability, and then a lot of the actual coding and routines that are implemented in the facilities are detailed in Chapter 25 on Freeway Facility Supplemental. So, why we analyze freeways at facilities? Until the 2016 HCM, all we did was really analyze individual segments. This is a screenshot of a particular freeway here locally in the Raleigh area, and it's a simple case where we do have an upgrade on a segment that you could see toward the back of the screen, spilling back and creating queuing into another segment. So in essence, segments impact each other, and we cannot analyze individual segments in isolation, especially under congested conditions. If it's uncongested, they may basically be fairly independent, but cannot be done certainly when we deal with incidents and work zones and weather events. So the first thing we need to do is to define what a freeway facility is. So we're giving you here three options on how this is done. Locally in the state of North Carolina, our DOT is very much supporting the implementation of the methods within the state, to the point where at this point we have created a database of all freeway and other controlled access facilities in the state. If you would look at the map on the right, you can see several different colors. These are indicative of the different types of segments that have been coded. So one way we can implement this in the FREEVAL model is to basically identify mileposts beginning at the ending of each facility, and those geometric attributes will automatically be loaded into the software, which is the easiest way to do it. We also, if you want to start a facility from scratch, we do have an interface with Google Maps that allows you also to create the facility, but you would have to be pointing to those individual segments on your own. And finally, if neither option is available to you, HCM6 procedure in Chapter 10 provides details on how to segment the individual facilities. In general, we also include managed lanes, and essentially, of course, these are considered to be additional facility either for HOV facilities or hot lanes where you may allow individual or single occupancy vehicle for a price. The methods in the HCM are included in Chapter 10, and it includes the different designs of those managed lanes, either with continuing access, diamond lane, or some that are physically separated both within the facility itself and even perhaps access and egress outside the facility. So we are able, for example, to test the effect of those managed lanes on travel time reliability. So some additional detail before we get into how the reliability is impacted. We do analyze up to 10 to 15 miles on a facility. We do model the queue propagation. We consider operation over individual 15 minutes up to 24 hours, which is important when you do reliability analysis. We do account for the effect of active and hidden bottleneck. And more importantly, we do allow for time variant demand and capacity on the facility. This is critical now because this allows us to look at short-term incidents that may last an hour or 45 minutes, look at the effect of weather that could impact the facility, as well as the impact of work zone. The model over time has been validated against both field data and micro-simulation and compared very favorably at about much lower cost, both in terms of coding time and the ability to receive results. Like everything else, it does have its limitation. For example, it does not account for off-ramp congestion that may spill back onto the main line. It has some difficulty sometimes when you have multiple overlapping queues within the facility. And It also required some manipulation of the input data if you want to extend the analysis to much longer facility. There is some work that has been completed at the University of Florida that actually will deal with at least the first question of the spillback. So let's move on now, talking about travel time reliability and the role of incidents here. Just a good introduction would be to look at how we did things in the past and how we are analyzing things today. In the past, we used to look at your average day, no rain, no special events, no incidents, and essentially assume and design for those average conditions. In reality, what travelers experience is not that at all. They experience variability in their travel time, even within the same time of day, day of week, and there are certain variability, and typically they would remember those days when their travel time is much higher than the usual case. So in essence, what we strive to do is to reflect those variability in travel time in generating what we call a travel time distribution. So on the right here are a number of travel time distribution based on real world data. And what you see here is, of course, most of these distributions have a right tail. And what it means is there are certain rare events that don't happen very often, but that cause very high travel times to occur. And what we're trying to do is to characterize what causes these long tails in these cases. The nice thing about this also is it does allow to tie in the analysis to programmatic improvement. Do we need to do better job, let's say, in snow removal? This example is about the effect of snow removal on travel time reliability. Do we need to improve our incident management program to also reduce some of these tails? So the important thing on reliability, it ties it in to things beyond what we usually do in recurring congestion. So these are the sources that are accounted for in the model. They're obviously, even within recurring congestion, it could vary by day of week, it could vary by month of year. That is accounted for. Special event, of course, work zone, weather events, and primarily incidents. So how do we treat those events in ACM6? Is through a series of scenarios. And you can think of scenarios as individual days of the year. Each one of these days is subject to a variety of events. It could be strictly your day-to-day bottleneck, and the only thing you have in a scenario is your morning or afternoon bottleneck, or it could include incidents, it could include weather events, and by looking at those individual days, we can now begin to predict what the reliability of the facility would be over an extended period of time. So, how we're accounting for these depends on the element itself. For example, the demand itself, demand volume on the facility is typically estimated to be based on the calendar. We usually have a lot of information about seasonal variability, about monthly variability. So we use the calendar to characterize those demand variations. As far as the work zones, we can deal with them in two ways. Very long-term, predictable, calendar-based work zone are dealt with as demand, and otherwise they could be looked at incident with unpredictable duration like a patch job, etc. When it comes to incidents and weather, we use a combination of deterministic in the sense that we know, whether it's going to snow in Raleigh or snow in Buffalo, New York. So we do have some weather probability for a number of cities around the country, but individually assigning them to scenarios is done in a random fashion. And that similar things happen with incident as well. So once we incorporate all of these effects, we generate the scenario and we generate the travel times. Typically, if you would be looking at Chapter 10, you would look at something called the time-space domain. The time-space domain is a box, if you will, that on each column represents a segment of the facility, each row represents an individual 15-minute period. And as you see here, we're just giving you a visual representation of a scenario where you have a rain event that starts in time period 3 to 5, 45 minutes long, and affects the entire facility. In addition, you have an incident that shuts down 2 lanes on segment 8 for a given time period. And in essence, the way this is done, anytime we apply any of these events, they result in a change in demand or capacity or free flow speed. That's really how we generate those different scenarios. So just to give you a sense on the effect of those different events, it's so clear here. This is a CDF, a cumulative distribution function of a travel time index. And what you see here, we have 4 conditions: recurring congestion only, recurring with weather, recurring with incident, recurring with both. And it's actually clear that incidents are the events that can increase your or decrease your reliability significantly. As an example here, if you look at the planning time index, which is related to the 95th percentile, if you do not include the incident, it's about 1.32. So basically, your travel time increased by about 32% above the free flow speed. On the other hand, if you include the incident, that jumps to 71% above the free flow speed. So this just tells us that dealing with incident is a critical piece in terms of the reliability. How we're dealing with the freeway reliability when it comes to incidents? We do provide defaults, although the best practice is to always try to use incidents from the facility itself. In North Carolina, we have a website where we record all the incidents and their characteristics, their location, how long they last, and this data is very critical in terms of calibrating our model. We could also use, if we don't have the incident data, we can translate crash data into frequency of incident using either an inflation factor or using a model like is shown here by the Earth to enable us to get to the incident location. Typically, the attributes, and this is going to be important as Behzad talks a little bit about what was done on this project. 3 things. How many on average we getting in terms of incident per day on a facility? So that's an input that is required in the procedure. Also, what is the severity distribution? How many of these are going to shut down 1 or 2 or multiple lanes on the facility? And the duration distribution. We use a log normal distribution to characterize the duration, and this is where we draw the duration of incidents to apply to our facility. The more important piece, and this is where we focus our research on, is what is the capacity impact and how does it represent itself in an incident. The table that I'm showing here, and Behzad will talk a little bit more about that later on, has been the practice for as long as I could remember. Has to do with how many lanes are open, how many lanes are closed. This would be the capacity impact. We don't think this is sufficient to characterize incident occurrence on freeway facility. And we think it's going to be important to do a bit more digging and get more improved modeling of that. So I'm going to now hand it to Behzad and have him talk a little bit about the project and what was done.
Thank you, Nagui. So in this part of this webinar, I'm going to focus more on what we have done in our STRIDE research project. I'm going to start with the objective of our STRIDE project, which were to review the methods for calibration of the model in HCM and focusing on how we are modeling incidents and what are the capacity impacts on the analysis, confirming baseline capacities in the absence of incidents and any other non-recurring source of congestion, see if they are making sense or not. Then assessing whether there is a temporal evolution in the impact of incidents when they're occurring in terms of HCM analysis context, and then at the end develop implementation plan on how we can take these findings and implement them for the users. So as Nagui was talking about scenario generation process for reliability analysis in the HCM, I'm showing you a detailed flowchart here that focuses on the modeling of the incidents within scenario generation. The important thing to know is that the process that generates incidents and assigns it to the scenarios starts with first estimating how many incidents are we going to have across all the reliability scenarios that we have generated. Then assigning different severity levels to these incidents, how many of them are shoulder closures, how many of them are one-lane closures. We determine those in a stochastic manner, and after that we assign duration to these incidents based on the log normal distribution that Nagui just talked about. After that, we have to assign these incidents that we know already how long they're going to take and how many lanes they will close to each scenario. And basically, we have to assign a segment number and to identify the spatial location of the incident, as well as the start time and what time these incidents will be started. And for that purpose, we typically look at the vehicle mile travel distribution across all the segments and time periods based on HCM's recommendation. And following that distribution, we assign incidents to the scenario. And then at the end, the important factor is we assign a CAF or capacity adjustment factor for these incidents that we are getting from HCM. Of course, users can alter that if they have a better data sets and basically adjust the capacity of the facility, reducing that based on the severity of these incidents. So HCM assumes that there are no overlaps between incidents. So when we assign start times and segment numbers, we do it in a way that there are no overlap occurs. So speaking of the impact of the incidents that at the end of scenario generation we want to assign, this table that is in the HCM shows the default capacity adjustment factors for different incident severity levels based on how many open lanes, how many lanes do we have on the freeway. As you can see, for example, if you have 2-lane and the 2-lane segment, if you have 1-lane closure, here the capacity adjustment factor for open lanes that we are seeing is 0.7. And that means that if we have 1 lane closed, which we already have lost 50% of our capacity, then we have 70% of the open lane capacity available to serve. And the important thing about this table is that these are fixed numbers. They don't vary by time. So during the course of incident, if it's 30 minutes, if it's 45 minutes, we have this amount of loss in the capacity, and this is a constant number across the board. But based on what we are seeing from different sources, we see that there are changes in the impact of incident on the capacity. Typically, a 2-lane closure ends up being a 1-lane closure and then clear. So this is basically the main subject of our research project that is targeted to characterize it. And if I want to highlight what we have done in terms of methodology in our project. First of all, we have selected a facility, I-540 westbound in Raleigh, North Carolina, to basically gather data, do our modeling, compare with the real world. I'm going to share more details about that in the coming slides. Then what we did was that we sort of looked into the baseline capacities that we are seeing on this facility based by looking at the recurring congestion, which is in the AM peak, and how many vehicles are serving based on the calibrated models and sensors. We confirmed that based on capacities, they are consistent with HTM. It's a little bit lower than HTM, but still within the framework of HTM. Then we looked into days that we have incidents. Of course, we were not looking, we excluded days that are incidents. They're overlapping with each other. We have a secondary incident going on. We excluded days that we have other non-recurrent source of congestion being presented, like rainy days or days with bad weather or special event, and came up with a set of days that we have a clean incident happening that basically causes some congestion, so that we go and look into how their capacity, basically they impact the capacity of our freeway. Then we categorize incidents into 1 and 2 lane closures. Majority of this facility is 3 lanes, so that was why we mostly were seeing 1 and 2 lane closures. Then what we did was that we borrowed the GA model that is already does the automatic calibration in FREEVAL, and which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the coming slides. We modified it so that we can basically so that we can get the impact of incidents in a time varying format from that. By performing that algorithm on top of all those days that we have incidents, we came up with this pool of CAFs that at the end we did a regression model on top of that and came up with adjustment factor for our capacity adjustment factor, which we can call it CAF-AF. So as you can see, this is our facility, mostly 3 lanes, and it's a high standard facility, very wide lane widths, very high free flow speed. The speed limit is at 65, our free flow speed is about 70-75 miles per hour. It's located in Raleigh, North Carolina. So at the beginning, we went over HCM, and as you can see here, we are showing the calibration procedure recommended by HCM, Chapter 25. I'm borrowing this exhibit from Chapter 25 that basically suggests a way to how, once we want to create a freeway facility model based on HCM, what are the steps that we have to take in order to calibrate that. That starts with gathering data, calibrating free flow speed first, locating bottleneck and adjusting its capacity, and then looking into the performance measures that are reported by freeway facilities modeler versus real world and adjusting that as needed. So one thing that you can see here that is within the HCM framework is that it locates the bottleneck for recurring congestion, changes its capacity. So it's really a one change for the entire study period. So there are no notion of varying these adjustments by time of day. So, and then one version, basically the implemented version of this this idea of how we can change these capacities for our baseline calibration, is a GA model that is built in FREEVAL. It was the outcome of one of our research projects, and basically it does the same thing that HCM talks about, but in a heuristic way and in a more a numerical way. And basically it goes and finds a bottleneck and tries to adjust its capacity adjustment factor so that our model gets calibrated. Again, here this GA model built in FREEVAL does not account for varying CAF by time of day. So if we want to measure the impact of incidents in terms of CAF and having that, to see what is the temporal changes, we cannot really use methods in HCM nor implementations in the computational engine. Here I'm showing you one example of base model calibration in FREEVAL and how this GA works and how faithful it is. On the top contour, you see a speed contour for a sample freeway that you can see shows the AM peak time of day across 17 segments, and you see some low speed indicated by red backgrounded cells. That's what we are seeing from sensors or probe-based data sources. And then once we do collect data for HCM model, collect all geometric and demand information, and we plug into FREEVAL, we come up with the second contour. And as you can see here, really it's not representing the real world condition. It basically can't show those low speeds and queuing that are happening. And then by running the GA model, asking FREEVAL's GA calibration model to adjust capacity adjustment factor for bottlenecks so that we create the same queuing as we are seeing in the real world, we come up with a calibrated model that I'm showing its contour on the third speed contour that we are seeing on the screen, which is very close to what we are seeing in the real world. So, speaking of the purpose of our project that is focused on looking into the temporal changes of the CAF for the incidents, we see some challenges that we have to overcome before going to measure those. One thing is that the GA model in the FREEVAL does not account for time varying of the CAF. So one thing that we have to build into that is that we need to make it in a way that so that we can characterize these CAF 15 minutes by 15 minutes independently. The other thing is that when we are looking into calibrating for let's say an incident that is happening, we really need to focus on the area that this incident has happened in terms of segments and time periods. We don't want to take into consideration the entire time and space domain, which the generic version of GA does that. And we are also showing you the objective function of the generic GA model that we have that shows basically tries to minimize the reported speeds out of freeway facilities model based on what we are seeing in the real world. We assign a higher weight to the low speeds so that we emphasize to give more priority to those segments around the bottleneck to be calibrated. So in this graph, I'm showing again another speed contour, which shows a recurring congestion that is happening in the AM peak around 8 a.m. and also show the congestion that is caused by an incident around 10 a.m. and it creates some queuing, which is smaller than the queuing that is created by recurring congestion in our bottleneck in this facility. So what we need really is that we are looking for a GA, a revised genetic algorithm that is able to adjust capacity adjustment factor for a subset of time periods in the segment that we are seeing incident, as I'm showing those here in this graph in a blue box. And also for the objective function, only looking at the congestion that is created by that incident, which is shown by a black box here. So we really don't want to include the rest of this time and space domain and what is happening in this freeway into our optimization model to get the impact of incidents in terms of capacity. So by considering these changes into our revised GA, which we implemented, we took the objective function, we limited its spatial and temporal domain to only confine the congestion that is created by our incident, and we can specify those based on different days that we have data for, and then basically by confining those, and also we allowed the objective function, decision variable, to vary by time of every 15 minutes, and also be a subset of the entire study period that we are seeing. So before showing the results that are the outcomes of implementing this revised GA on top of incidence, we want to show you, by implementing our revised GA on top of recurring congestion, what we have found that sort of assures its credibility. So by looking at the bottleneck, the recurring congestion bottleneck that we are seeing every day in our facility in the AM peak, we try to adjust capacity for that bottleneck, see like what would this revised GA recommend for the capacity of our bottleneck to be. And what we saw by going across several days that we had data for, it's a CAF of 0.92. So looking into HCN's default capacity proposed, which is 2,400, considering adjustment factor of 0.92, it takes us about 2,200 passenger car per hour per lane, which is something that almost everyone is comfortable with, and it sort of indirectly assures us of the faithfulness of this revised GA model. So going back to the original research that we have done in this project, these are dates that we found single incidents are happening, either one-lane closure or two-lane closure on this facility, that they are not overlapping with any other facility, nor with the congestion of the recurring congestion on a daily basis. There are no severe weather days and stuff in it, and we end up with this set of days. And you can see you're showing some of the characteristics of what is happening on that day. You know, what is the queue size, what was the location of incidents, type of segments, and so on. And then here I'm showing an example of our implementation of our revised GA model on one of these days. I'm basically in this table showing you three different things with three contours, speed contours. Top one shows what we are seeing from INRIX, our probe-based data source in terms of speed. It shows low speeds close to about 8-9 miles per hour per average 15 minutes. And then I show what our revised GA has changed, has calibrated our FREEVAL to model this incident, and basically numbers are of the queuing patterns very similar to what we are seeing from our INRIX reported speeds. And then at the end, I'm showing what FREEVAL would report if we just go with what HCM suggests to us, and which shows that doesn't really create the congestion that you are seeing in a real world. If you look at the error function, we see that our revised GA has produced a much lower error compared to real world than what HCM default values are suggesting us. So when we ran our revised GA on top of all the data that we had in our data set, these are capacity adjustment factor, basically profiled for every 15 minutes that we are getting from each of these days. Of course, the incidents that are happening, they have different durations, but in most of these cases, we see that CAF, really the capacity loss at the beginning, is much higher than at the end of incident. This really shows us that the evolution of the incident within the duration is something that exists. So although that we were suspecting that this CAF is a function of really the duration of the incident, nevertheless we try to see if this trend that we are seeing is correlated with any other parameter within our model, like for example D over C, demand to capacity ratio, V over C ratio, or all other things. And the strongest correlation that we found by these time varying CAFs was with basically the duration of the incident. And by looking at those CAFs that I was showing a couple of slides earlier, we used the regression models. We developed 3 regression models to represent how this capacity adjustment factor varies by time during the course of incident for one lane closure incidents, for two-lane closure incident, and then at the end we create one model for everything together. We did a statistical test to see which one are these really different or not. We didn't find any significant really in these. So we decided to just go with one model. And our basically model is what you are seeing on the top line. It shows that our time-dependent capacity adjustment factor is 1.637 times I, which is the time period within the incident, divided by N, which is the total number of 15 minutes in the incident or incident duration, times HCM capacity. So our time-dependent adjustment factor is a function of HCM, default capacity adjustment factor, and also the progression in terms of time within the duration of the incident. Here I'm showing an example of how our proposed model can work or can propose different time-varying adjustment factor. Think about a one-lane closure incident that is happening on a freeway that we have 3 lanes. By looking at the table that we have at the bottom of the slide, you see that HCM suggests an adjustment factor of 0.74 for this incident for remaining open lanes. And then by taking the equation we presented in the previous slide, we can basically characterize a CAF of 0.4 and 0.8 and 1.2 for this 45-minute incident that is happening. That HCM only tells the average capacity adjustment factor for this 45-minute 3 analysis period are 0.74. Actually, there are 3 distinct numbers. And if we look into the average of these 3 numbers, it is slightly higher than what HCM suggests, but the important piece is that these are changing by time within the incident, and typically starts a low number, goes up. So I covered pretty much what we have done in this research project, but what is remaining really is that we picked just one freeway facility, I-540 westbound in the Raleigh area. It's a high standard facility, but all our deductions are based on that. So we recommend to have further data sources, basically data sources in terms of the database of the incidents that we have, different freeways, different geometries, maybe different demand to capacity ratios in terms of how congested freeways are, so that we get better models. We can correlate what we are seeing by different weather events, weather types presented in the facility. In our research, we excluded all the days that we had any weather conditions. And then at the end, we have developed a framework, envision how we can implement it, but in FREEVAL, but really the implementation remains for the future. So with that said, I summarized what we have done in our research projects, and I'm going to take the remaining 7-8 minutes and talk about how we have envisioned the implementation of what we have got from this research project into FREEVAL. For those of you that you are not familiar, FREEVAL is the official computational engine of HCM related to methods presented in the Volume 2 uninterrupted flow facilities methods. FREEVAL exists from 1999, but really recent versions are after HCM6 are 2015E, and there are some evolutions of FREEVAL versions. Depending on new research that comes in and gets incorporated in FREEVAL, we have a newer version of FREEVAL. The latest FREEVAL is FREEVAL NC. You guys can go to freeval.org. We have the latest versions of different versions available for download, as well as accessing to user's guide, training materials, YouTube videos, online segmentation database, and so on. So I'm going to take advantage of the remaining 5 minutes and basically run FREEVAL and just go over it very quickly and talk how this research can be implemented in that arena. So I just ran FREEVAL. Right now we are seeing FREEVAL window. It's empty because there's nothing going on. I'm going to go and create a new project. I have different means to create my project. Either go with HCM guidelines to create my facility, use map-based segmentation, or if you are in North Carolina, entire freeway interstate and non-interstate system is coded in FREEVAL, so we can just go ahead and pull a freeway from that. So as you can see here in this screen, I can browse through all the freeways that we have in our state. I go and actually pick I-540, the same freeway that we were using for this research, westbound. I want to pick it from mile marker 15.9 up until about 7. As you can see, this is the facility in Raleigh, and then at the end I want to pull its data from our database. I'm going to pick our study period to start at 6 a.m. and finishes at noon, because I already know that this facility experiences AM congestion. And at the end, because this is for weekday analysis, I'm going to pick one of the distributions of demand that we have for weekday to apply for this facility. And here it is. This is facility with all the data being inputted, all the geometric and demand information. We can take a look at map view. There's a big integration of Google Maps with FREEVAL. And then, as you can see in this big table, I have all the detailed input and outputs. We have this graphical representation of the facility and map view. And if I traverse through each 15 minutes, as I get close to 8 p.m., you see the congestion on a average day that is occurring in this facility, and we can see it everywhere. So since I want to show you how incidents are modeled and how we can use results from this research, I'm going to pursue with reliability analysis and to create a real reliability model and see what are the impacts of incidents. So I'm happy with the generic properties of my reliability analysis, starting from January 1st being a one-year-long analysis time horizon. I want to use the default demand variation for months in a year and days in a week to be used for this reliability analysis. I'm going to skip over any work zones and basically dive into incidence modeling. So as Nagui was mentioning, one of the big things that we need to have here is that how likely is it for us to see incidents? Either we can go and collect data from real world, enter it here. We can use Hearst model. For this example purpose, I'm just going to go ahead and put 2 incidents per study period I'm expecting to see on this example analysis. And then on top right, we are showing the distribution of the severity of the incidents and what are the mean duration, standard deviation. All these numbers are coming from HCM, their default numbers. HCM always recommends that if you have access to local data, facility-specific ones, go ahead and incorporate them. And then in the 4 tables at the bottom, we are showing that what FREEVAL will use to model incidence impact and capacity and free flow speed. As you can see here, we don't have really a model for free flow speed or demand adjustment factors, but we see the same table as I was showing to you, that these are capacity adjustment factors for incidence, that these are fixed numbers, they don't vary by time, but FREEVAL takes it and uses it and models our incidence. So I go to the weather tab quickly and just pick, let's say, Raleigh, North Carolina, and extract weather likelihoods and create my reliability scenarios that Nagui was talking about this process. And here on the left, you can see my reliability scenarios. And each of these reliability scenarios try to model a day in our calendar. So, and then for all these, so for example here, I'm just hovering over these scenarios, and as you can see, this scenario has 2 incidents going on. And for both of these 2 incidents, basically HCM uses a constant number to adjust capacity for the entire duration of these incidents. And what we are recommending is that to replace our model, basically amend it to the table that FREEVAL takes as the HCM default and adjust it by that. And now, at the end, I want to show reliability results. So the reliability analysis that we did yield such a cumulative distribution for travel time index with all key reliability performance measures listed. Yes. And then, of course, FREEVAL shows a lot of different outputs. On the incident side, you can see it shows that how many incidents that we generated and how we have distributed across different segments. As I mentioned, FREEVAL by default goes by VLT distribution across segments and models those. And basically, the ratio that you see between different severity levels are the same as we have input into FREEVAL. So with that said, I'm done with part 4. And before we open the floor for any questions and discussions, I want to bring to your attention the survey that we have here. That I'm pretty sure you can find this link in the comment box. We appreciate if you take a couple of minutes and provide us with your feedback on how we did. This will help our Stride to have higher quality webinars. So with that said, I want to open the floor for discussions while I'm showing also on the screen the upcoming webinars for your attention if you are interested to book it on your calendar and join us. All right, so I guess we need to look into our comment box for questions because as
the chat box.
Yeah, because I'm seeing everyone is mute. So if you any of participants, if you have any questions, any comments, please let us know. You can type it in the chat box. We'll be happy to.
Yeah, I'm actually also curious because one of the biggest challenge that we found was to try to tie in the data from the incident data that we have access to the speed data that is coming from the probes. Very often, there was not a lot of synchronization between the timing and sometimes even the type of incidents and what we were seeing in terms of the congestion caused by that incident. So I'm also curious about how others, if there are any listeners that have gone through those data and found some interesting patterns in them.
So looks like we just got a question from Paul. In the incident data, did you find any variation in demand flow over time?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Demand is a very tough, even though we have the hooks for incorporating demand adjustments, there's really very little research on how incident affects demand. Of course, in the data itself, there is no, unless there is a diversion away from the incident location, it's not something that you get direct access to. It's something that you almost have to derive based on. So if we see a very severe incident and we do not see a lot of congestion, we can conjecture that possibly there's been some diversion because the basic demand would have caused a lot more congestion. But that's a very good point, and one that, unfortunately, if you're in the HCM world, they don't try not to deal with demand as a variation, but only as an input into our models. But excellent question.
So we just got another question. It says, was the length of incident in your research determined by the length of time of queuing or based on incident data of when the incident was cleared, after which queuing may still exist?
I think it's the second one. It's only when the incident is clear. It's not when the queue is clear, it's when the incident ends itself, meaning that they've opened the lanes, but then there is still queuing that is going to be impacted. One of the things that I need to also highlight is we're kind of constrained in a way by the HCM 15-minute analysis. Very often, incidents are not going to match our 15-minute period. So a lot of people have done kind of different things, run an incident for 30 minutes and 15 minutes, while the incident duration may be 20 minutes or so. So our definition in terms of what we put in was when the lanes were open to traffic.
Yeah. Well, and also I can add a little bit more details to what Nagui just said. We have our basically when we look at congestion, when we look at our speed based on the probe data sources like INRIX and here, we have more trust on that comparing to the incident data that we were getting from our DOT. So we just said that we want to go with what we are seeing in the queuing. Plus, if we believe in our models, even if incidents basically ends sooner than what we are thinking, the queuing will last longer, we will get by our GA algorithm, we'll get CAS close to 1, indicating that really those maybe 1 or 2 15 minutes really incident doesn't have impact on the capacity. So it's automatically being taken care of in our GA model.
And of course, one thing we may want to add our emails, Behzad, in case people would like to follow up with questions beyond the webinar.
Yeah.
We failed to put these on, but we'll add them to the presentation. Of course, any question you may have regarding either the research or the actual model, once you have a chance to download, we'll be happy to help.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We hope to see you on future STRIDE webinars.